we we as the community work group, we have initiated this practice share. It's the first time, and we are very happy to have two nice presentations for you coming up. It's going to work like this. First, Cynthia Deng and Elif Ires will present their practice. Their practice is called Bags, and they've described it as a collaborative spatial practice and blobby design collective, which for me already sounds very intriguing. So I'm looking forward to their perspective. After that, Ishita Shah will present her work as designer and curator. She has a curation collective called Curation for Culture, which is focusing on cultural preservation, creative interpretation, and community engagement. And after these short presentations, there's time for collective questioning, collective discussions. Because I just heard a little bit weird sound, I'm just checking in if everybody can hear me properly. Yes? Okay, that's great. Then I actually would like to invite Bags, Cynthia and Elif to start sharing their screens and present their work. They're calling in now from Mexico and New York, and I'm looking forward to your story.
Yeah, thank you. Can everyone see our screen?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much, Renske. It's awesome to be here and sharing the space with everyone. Hello, my name is Cynthia.
And I'm Elif. We're part of Bags, as Renske said, a collaborative spatial practice and blobby design collective. We're very honored to be here with all of you, and since we have a short time, we'll try to dive right in.
Yes, so just as a little background, I currently teach at the Tecnológico de Monterrey, which is in a city called Querétaro in Mexico.
And I currently practice at Studio Gang Architects in New York.
And we started collaborating in grad school around 2017, so 6 years ago. And we're gonna try to share the following things today with everyone. To start, we would like to share this non-manifesto that we wrote together during the time when we did our thesis together, which we'll get to in a bit. It articulates the values that we try to embody through our practice and work. And as hopefully you can see, these ideas come from many intellectual foremothers who have influenced our thinking and our practice.
In a world centering care and repair, architects would recognize that things are made up of parts that change at different speeds.
They would take indeterminacy, precarity, and vulnerability as our base condition.
Embrace constant and non-linear change, movement, and adaptation, knowing that there is no finished or permanent end state.
Focus as much on processes as on outcomes.
Expand their scope of responsibility to maintain, sustain, and nourish works over time.
Step fully into our roles as facilitators, translators, care workers, among many care workers.
Work on the built fabric of everyday life, not on objects or isolated buildings.
Engage and cultivate sites as nodes entangled in a field of relationships and embedded in power networks and complex ecologies.
Turn away from any single master narrative and engage overlapping, partial situated perspectives.
Lift up careful and careful modes of knowing and center caretaker standpoints because they know different worlds.
Understand waste as a dynamic resource, fertile ground of latent potential.
Does not create anew necessarily, but rather redistributes the abundance that we already have.
And design for broadest and fullest use by recognizing and working with more users, knowers, claimers, and makers of space, which in turn expands architects' creative agency.
So with that in the foreground, we'd like to share a little bit about the thesis that we worked on together, which kind of was when Bags was born, I guess. We completed this in the winter of 2020. It's titled Care Agency, a 10-year choreography of architectural repair. And we had framed it as a dispatch from a possible future in the year 2040. And we had presented it in a kind of role play or narrative play that we won't replicate exactly here. But basically there is a worldwide moratorium on resource extraction, which meets the establishment of many municipal care agencies or public platforms that provide free and networked care services. So our dispatch came from the Mexico City Care Agency, where we imagined ourselves as workers in 2040. And included in the agency's services is the repair of the built environment. Here, repair does not seek to restore past conditions, but adapts to future ones. So it's a transformative act of care. And in this future, all design is repair, maintenance, and reuse. And architects are care workers that are part of a team of public servants in the care agency.
The agency recognizes care as everything that is done to maintain, continue, and repair the world so that all can live in it as well as possible. Mexico City's 2017 Constitution actually explicitly lays out the right to care, along with the right to reparations, the right to the city, among others. If we interpret the right to care in the broadest collective sense in the context of the architectural discipline, how would that change what we do and the parameters by which we judge it? Might the architect's creative work become a continuous labor of care, recognizing architecture as a dynamic assemblage of materials and processes and relationships that require constant maintenance and repair?
So in our material repair explorations, we explored design methodologies such as sistering, which is characterized by interdependence and shared loads. We recognized other scales of sistering too, such as the three sisters of corn, beans, and squash, and this led into further design explorations. We imagined also the legal and cultural norms in this world, which included the prioritization of broadest and fullest use as opposed to highest and best use, and things like the material easement, which allows the public the right to use parts of others' property for public material storage and resource storage, or the liminal easement to use unused, leftover, or in-between parts of properties. We also created multiple speculative infrastructures that could guide material redistribution and archiving and adapting practices for the future. So for example, pictured here is a piece of the index of structures as material banks.
And our thesis told stories about 3 sites. Estadio Azul is an aging and unprofitable stadium. Casa Slim is billionaire, or in the future, former billionaire, Carlos Slim's mansion on a massive concrete space frame. Insurgentes 320 is a building deteriorating due to soil subsidence and owner negligence. All of the site interventions involve some form of sistering or spatial repairings of material support and social support. The design process involves requests for care, or RFCs, which anyone can file. The local Grandmother Council deliberates and approves RFCs, which care agency workers translate into instructables, a set of broadly interpretable design steps or scaffolds for imagination that leave open possibilities for unscripted use and adaptation. Post-construction and occupancy, care agency workers record the structure in an as-built drawing for the reference of future repairs.
So at one of these sites, the Estadio Azul, the columns are sistered. We told stories about various structural interjection possibilities, like steel sections sharing compressive loads with existing columns, and at the same time creating space for gathering or storage, or clusters of used billboard poles, supporting the upper seating rake that also became a hot spot for market tarp hookups, or a salvage radio tower sistered with an existing column now containing utilities for a collective kitchen.
At Casa Slim, the former mansion is cut through and the concrete space frame grid underneath is sistered. This enables the concrete grid space, which was previously unused, to support a public living room for domestic workers and material storage while reinforcing it structurally. Possible interpretations of the instructable included bracing shelves, a sistered timber frame system for ramps, and a vertical circulation tower with independent foundations sharing concrete beam loads with supportive L brackets.
At the third case study, Insurgentes 320, the facade is sistered, stabilizing the building walls and supporting space for repair workshops and a maintenance lab where community members can learn hands-on how buildings change over time and where new care workers can train for their roles in the agency. Possibilities included a series of raking shores, an occupiable scaffold space frame, and a truss that sistered the back wall to the front facade, which is the one that is currently pictured. For all of these, the project is never 100% complete. It's always in flux and full of potential, from the scale of the joint to the aggregated civic shifts. And by no means is the architect's involvement in these sites ever concluded.
So our thesis influenced a lot of our work thereafter, and its origins came from a project that we worked on together in 2017. We were part of a team that tracked material flows across Mexico City from one worker's hands to another. Funded through a grant at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, we went to Mexico City, and over the course of about 2 months, we interviewed over 90 people, from informal recyclers and street sweepers to resellers and government officials. And we also drew the spaces that were nodes of material and social exchange. We shadowed workers to draw the daily choreographies that make up the labor of maintenance and material exchange in the city, and along the way learned from many existing infrastructures of revaluation and redistribution. And this work was a seed that we built on later in thesis and elsewhere.
And then fast forward to later in grad school, we worked on a series of small projects, such as this pavilion called Social Scaffolding, which was selected to be built at Harvard's Arts First Festival in the spring of 2020. We know what happened in the spring of 2020, so thanks to COVID, that festival was canceled. The installation never got built on site. The idea was to call attention to unseen ongoing works of maintenance, care, and community building on campus. But we were able to, before everything shut down, work on a mock-up, and we worked with Mary and her construction company that would have lent us the hot pink scaffolding frames for the pavilion. And post-thesis, we also worked on a couple short competitions, like this pavilion for orchid cultivation and education. We designed a space of multi-species encounter with these modular shelving units that double as structure, and the structure which changes with seasonal cycles and with use.
For another competition, we proposed a catwalk for everyday occurrences in the central Alameda Park of Mexico City, made from local borrowed electric blue scaffolding and mesh. The linear pavilion straddles an existing park path, accentuating and elevating the existing pedestrian flows and activity and turning it into a stage of sorts. We've co-led quite a few repair workshops as part of various courses and studios at many schools and at a couple of conferences. These are ever-evolving hybrid workshops that experiment with the idea of repairing forward as an exercise in world building and reflection. We build in storytelling and fiction crafting elements as part of these pedagogical experiments.
And we've been more recently seeking ways to physically manifest the idea of sistering and of using only existing materials, either salvaged or leftover. And that's how we started working with our friend Christian, who I think is here, on the Brook Hill Bothy, which is a prototype for material reuse and multi-species cohabitation. The Bothy is developed from the remains of a 6 by 8 foot structure that we just looked at, and as that Elif is circling, it's located on the edge of a northern hardwood forest in Hamden. And yeah, this site was housing this weathered wood frame shed for over 30 years. So the project proposes a repairing of the shed, a structural repair, of course, and also a repair of ecological relationships and pairing again the materials with the multi-species networks in which it is enmeshed. Awesome. Thank you, Rensky. We are very close to finishing.
Pictured are where all the materials from the shed came from. We'll click through some process photos from measuring and documenting pre-deconstruction to deconstruction, cleaning and sorting of materials, meticulous inventorying, more sorting and storing. And in blue, you can see the materials from the old shed on the left that became part of the new shed on the right, and all other materials were either salvaged or traded locally.
And in order to design explicitly for multi-species cohabitation, there was a whole process of research about the endemic species, how they use space, how we could collaborate with them. And then following, there's some photos from the construction process by our collaborator, Christian Nakarado, who single-handedly constructed the roof and the siding and a lot of important parts. And you know, at the beginning we called bags blobby because it's morphing to hold and to intersect with many other people, actors, and creative practitioners. So the shed is almost finished. Here are some photos that Christian took, I think less than a week ago.
And we'll be presenting this project at the AXA Material Economies Conference later in October. So hope to see some of you there maybe. And we're always open to future conversations and collaborations. Please reach out to us if you have any ideas.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to Ishita and to the discussion.
Thank you so much for this rich presentation and very inspiring presentation already. I'm really looking forward to talking more with you and also working with you. We will now first move on to Ishita if she has managed to... Are you ready? Your sound is still up. You can turn on it. So we first move on before we go in a collective discussion. Ishita calling in from Bangalore, India. You're welcome. The floor is yours.
Hello there. Hi, I'm Ishita Shah, and thank you so much for having me here at Feminist Spatial Practices to be a part of the first practice share. It's a bit unnerving, also because I don't think we yet very clearly identify ourselves working in the most grounded and the most necessary feminist spaces. And hence what I'm going to do with my presentation is try out something very different. Instead of getting into the process, instead of getting into the whys and the do's and don'ts of our practice, which should sort of qualify us why we are here. Usually that's how we all do presentations. I'm just going to take us through different parts of our practices, different forms of our practices, and perhaps leave the question open. Is this what comprises feminist practices? Yeah, feminist spatial practices. So without further delay, let me jump into the first project. So one, I mean, of course, it helps to first see the works that directly relate to spatial practice, spatial research. And I'm not sure why that happened. Okay. So you should be able to see the website called Women of Vastukala. And this is a very recent project. We received a grant from the Graham Foundation for research about women practitioners. Our interest was in looking at first generation women practitioners and their histories, which are completely lost to time. Now, in the last few years, a lot of unearthing has been happening, but definitely not enough. And we thought that if we could find their personal stories, their oral histories about them through their family members, will put into perspective what had conspired. And hopefully, with that, we should be able to rewrite or at least subvert the way architectural history in India has been seen post independence. Now, while we could not really do that, we still continued speaking with the second generation women architects. And here is what finally we could create in the form of a digital archive, which was always the intention. And hopefully we'll add the first generation women practitioners conversations to this growing archive. The second aspect being it was important for us to tell or not tell, but important for us to practice that content is first created for research. There's a very strong need for archiving, for collecting history or historical narratives in the form that they are or they have been left with, and then get into the process of interpreting, reinterpreting, and writing about it, and hence a digital archive. So where you could actually go and listen to what the women practitioner has to say. Sorry, some of these clips are not working currently because of updates on the platform of AudioMac. And you can always, just like any other archiving platform, you can search. There's also an overview of how many different archives have we, or oral history, sorry, have we collected, the different metadata through which you can search and look for content on the platform. This is where you can find the overview of the project. And this is to say you can listen to, you can read the transcripts, and we want to start mapping the presence of women practitioners across the country. We have now got about 21 oral histories on this platform, and we know for sure that there are many more whom we need to talk to. On that note, I think we can move to the recent exhibition. This happened in July, and it sort of emerges from this research project. We wanted to launch this archive, and Arth Sheila, the foundation, and the art gallery hosts invited us to build an exhibition instead. This is why I think we could open with this image when I just said that there are many more women architects who need to be, whose stories and whose histories need to be looked into, whose architecture needs to be understood. So one of the important aspects of the exhibition was to leave all these names up on the wall and urge our viewers to add to this inventory, if I call it so, or add to this list. And then the other aspect of the exhibition was to sort of speak about missingness of these stories in the Indian architectural practice, pedagogy, sense of an office, and hence we call this we called it vandalizing the Indian atelier. The idea was to actually just rip apart, if I might call it so, a conventional architecture practice, which is always so crisp, clean, clear organization of spaces, of course, with all the white background or a white cube. And the architect, the male lead architect, knows what's going to happen. Whereas we had limited time, but also we are in the nascent stages of this research, so we didn't know what is going to happen with these stories when they're brought out into a physical space. We obviously went 2 steps further, and we reached out to the women practitioners to send their physical archives. So how will the audiences feel when they held somebody's personal materials in their hands, read through somebody's diaries, or looked at the fact that not many of their drawings remain, or somebody has been able to preserve all their documentation. And vis-a-vis, when you listen to their stories, their oral histories, what are the emotions, what are the experiences that it generates, and what sense of care for these histories sort of starts flowing through. And that is where we wanted to meet our audience. So one of the important aspects, of course, to our practice is to constantly understand the word care and perhaps keep re-understanding it. And it's to say that care doesn't need to become a very romantic idea, but rather be something more constructive. And that is where the community starts mattering to us. And the word community comes in next, in terms of who are the audiences, why is public as an audience so important to the work that we do? Why should they be able to connect with architectural histories and vice versa? It just feels like I could just leave you all to read something from the exhibition. And with that, I will move to another effort in terms of redefining architectural research and dissemination. So I was invited by Biome Architects, led by architect Chitra Vishwanath and Sharat Nayak and Anurag Tamankar, to create their architectural monograph. And I would first call it a monograph because that's how we all associate with, they wanted to write about their projects. But what was interesting is that early on, we all agreed in the process that it's not so much about just describing the architectural projects or even its process, it's deeper than that. And we started looking at ideas of stories and relationships. And that is what made Biome Diaries a more accessible, sometimes even a more exciting volume to look at, and forget that it's really about architecture for a moment, because a concept needs to be conveyed. What is biome? And one of the team members, how would they draw it? Versus certain projects have poetics to them, even though one is first focused on ecological principles or focused on site, and a lot of them are quite cost-effective projects or low-cost projects. But then there is a sense of poetics that you can maybe see now, and how do you write about that? Projects which are lost to time, of course, very important projects, but they don't remain. And again, comes in the whole idea of how close now history is to us, right? It's very recent past that you constantly deal with. And then, of course, the experiments in the office. But what is interesting is that all of this took us into a process of making a multi-authored publication where the clients whom we must have interviewed, collaborators, contractors, they came in to contribute. They drew, they wrote, they designed, and it became a publication of the larger ecosystem, or of a village coming together, rather than just the architect or just the author or the curator being the face of the publication. And hence it literally sort of meanders through different styles, different ways of telling stories, different ways of making information more and more accessible to a common audience. And this was all through COVID, through the pandemic. And this was finally self-published. It's very interesting that a publication like this was sort of met with a very interesting request on the other side, right? So as much as we all must have questions about architectural monographs and the conventional and breaking the conventional ways of looking at architectural communication, in the same way, there are more forms of publication which are coming about with, and in terms of magazines or magazines which would carry book reviews or journals and similar. I mean, of course, it's happening world over, and what you see here, Subversion, is such an effort by RV College of Architecture in Bangalore. And the editors sort of reached out to me saying that we don't want the book review to come from somebody else, but we rather have you. And they really did pick my brain with the kind of questions that were asked. Of course, I can only let you be on this PDF for a bit, but of course, as I am constantly showing this to say that there are all of this is available online, and one would be able to share these links along with the after the presentation for you all to read. And there are some very interesting questions about the city, about my connection to the city. Me being in Bangalore is itself a transition. I am a migrant there. I don't belong to, I'm not born and brought up there. So what does it mean for me to build a practice like this from there, all the way into its relationship with the work that Biome does? And why should a publication be about the city, about the context? And similarly, the context of an archive or archiving as a practice, which sort of comes with the work we do at Curating for Culture. And this, why I've said it's an interesting way that it, I mean, interesting thing that it sort of meets the other end. Because if you pick Biome Diaries, especially the forward talks about this, but also two other authors, in fact, forwards of two different diaries has been written with similar questions, or even the afterword, which has been written by Professor Mary Woods, speaks about the making of an archive and somewhere subverting of an archive, which are some very important questions that we have been asking in our practice in perhaps in the last 3-4 years, as when we started perhaps engaging with the idea of South Asia, the idea of regional and its relationship with the global through our practice, and the idea of community interpreting itself has been very not life-changing, but definitely game-changing. It constantly puts us in a push and pull about who are we really working for, who are we serving, and who is sort of contributing to us, and are we thorough with our knowledge exchange, or does it very slightly slip into a unknown power dynamics? And I mean, before I move from spatial practices and the kind of points that I've raised about relationships, I just want to give us a sneak preview of where it all began for me. I set up Sept Archives exactly a decade ago. I started that journey. It is India's first archive for architecture, planning, and design related materials. It has now over 20 collections, and it has built exhibitions. It has, supported different kinds of research projects and endeavors, different kinds of architects, as you can see. The website is also now under rework, and more data from this end of the world shall be made available for researchers and audiences to engage with. And it's important for me to recognize this work and this platform or this opportunity to be able to see where and how we have grown over the last decade to build what Curating for Culture stands for. And when I say what it stands for and all that I was describing earlier is to say that one has started seeing spatial practices, and perhaps the questions are much older, as a space of relationships, as a space of more than just building and constructing homes and offices, and or even the idea of construct is more than just constructing through materials, and more clarifying what this research-based practice is striving towards. And in that space, we have also worked with more subjects, gone out of a comfort zone, definitely. So this is one good example where Lab Culture was a two-part exhibition done with National Center for Biological Sciences, which was curated out of works of 10 biological laboratories in NCBS in Bangalore. And 10 would be too much, so we obviously went about putting a two-part exhibition, 5 in one cluster. And this allowed us to explore two kinds of exhibitions. Where does culture come in? Where does art come in? How do we use those tools to sort of simplify but not dilute scientific knowledge or scientific explorations, experiments, as well as what role does space play? And it was a very strong transition as a curator for me. In the first exhibition, the space was a canvas, but in the second exhibition, it was very important. It was a very strong realization that the space or the building really needs to wear the exhibition, needs to take it in. And this is not in terms of aesthetics that I say so. It's more in terms of the narrative, which was built around understanding the institution and its culture and how it impacts the scientific explorations. And hence, it re-informs the art and cultural processes of putting together an exhibition. And hopefully that allowed us to, that kind of a process allowed us to connect with more audiences, make it more playful. Of course, our knowledge also grew in this. I had forgotten science for a long time until we did this, or at least deeper forms of science. This is not it. The idea of relationships and personal has been at the root of the work that we are doing. And we have worked with many more forms of archive building or cultural preservation initiatives across different towns and cities in India, some collaborations even with South Asian communities or institutions, and constantly in dialogue with the international community to learn from and then adapt and formulate what would it mean for us.
So one of the idea I have in my mind is basically whatever we create, the new archives I'm talking about, right? Whether it holds an original material, whether it holds a digital collection, whether it holds people's history or oral history or any cultural related material or any kind of stories that is attached with humans, for example, right? Human life. Somehow it has to be institutionalized. So I really want to kind of think about an idea or think in a concept how we can work together to create an institution so that these materials, what we have collected as a personal collection, could live for another 100 years. What is important is the data we have collected over the period of time. If it is not shared with people, it doesn't mean anything. It has
huge regret that they've had that हमने उनकी सारी किताबें दे दी. You know what they did with the books is horrendous. Like they didn't even give it to some library, whatever. Like that, there's so much regret in there. I think they just gave all his, like, you know, all the books, the entire library to, I don't know, some random person, or what they did with the books. No one has accountability for it, except that there's huge amount of regret around it. So I think that also plays a very important part, the loss, the feeling of loss of, yeah, it's almost like something I could have owned from him, and yet I don't have. So there's a huge chunk of absence. It's almost like painful, you know, to, I don't know how to put it, and how that in larger picture.
Ideally, I should have left the presentation at that poignant note. But I think it's very important to say that it's not just about romanticizing or, again, lamenting about the past. It's also about addressing the times today, bringing the regional histories, the local, the everyday histories into sort of a connection back with reality, the times today, so that we have something more to look forward to in the future. It's becoming more and more important in the current socio-political climate. I don't think these intentions were that clear, perhaps a decade ago. But now, when we have very strong cultures of erasure, it's critical that there are more efforts to not erase, to preserve and make more sense of what has happened, what was told. So this is an invitation to everyone who is listening now or later. We have also been working with personal archives and family histories. So moving from spatial histories to science or cultural or other forms of engagement to personal and family histories. And one of those projects, which we incubated about 3 years ago, is taken full-fledged shape by now, and we are preparing for its launch and exhibition in about a few weeks or a month. This is in December 2023, and you are all invited, welcome to see what more could be done with the kind of practice that we hope to build, which is around cultural preservations and a criticality towards care for community. We still don't know who we are, and just identify ourselves through our interests, diverse practitioners. You can scroll through our website to find out more about us. It's a very fluid setup at Curating for Culture. Not anyone is fully committed, not anyone is dependent on this practice, but the practice is dependent on perhaps our interests and views. So that makes us a much larger collective, floating about places, about interests, and coming together when a project beckons. We work towards the cause of cultural preservation, and largely the words around which our practice is focused is community engagement, critical interpretation, and creative collaborations. That's about us for now, and we look forward to hearing from you all. Okay with contestation and discussions around things that has been said here, but also looking forward to collaborating with you all. I hope these links are helpful for you all to write to us, get to know us more. Thank you.
Really nice to see also these practices next to each other, because to me they appear totally different, but at the same time address similar topics. I hear a lot about care, a lot about community participation, which is nice topics to get involved in a conversation right now. I already understood that there are many questions in the audience. I also have burning questions, but I would prefer to open it up immediately. So if you have a question, maybe just raise your hand by using the reactions, so I can easily see who's up. And maybe we can start with Ryojia, if I pronounce your name right. Already, yeah, there you are.
I go by Ruo. So I'm from the process committee. And thank you all so much for the wonderful presentations. And I have a couple of bags of questions for bags, if it's okay. So I was especially impressed with a couple of formations in your non-manifesto manifesto, which is to some extent still a manifesto. So that might be like a leading question. But especially the concept of sistering, I think it's very catching and striking. But what is the critical difference or the critical contribution that this formation brings, in addition, for example, to words like supporting or pairing, which I feel in terms of design strategy could be similar or related. I'd love to hear more about that. I think that could be really wonderful for us to continue to think along the line of sistering. And then I really love how you are reforming as like the broadest and fullest use of materials and instead of the best, right? But I'm wondering how maybe, especially in terms of the reparation shed project, how the attempts to broadest and fullest use of certain materials really like necessarily needs more energies from a broader community and broader ecosystems that sometimes is jeopardizing other presences and existences self-preservation instincts. Which I think is the main roadblock for reparation in like our current reality in the status quo. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this bag of questions. Sorry, Cynthia, were you about to jump in? I'll let you go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I can address, I think there are like at least 3 questions, and maybe to the first two, the kind of point about it being then a manifesto that we called a non-manifesto. I think we would kind of shying away from the kind of claims to authority that traditional manifestos perhaps like imply, and it's all, it maybe if you remember from that screen, it's all like really ideas that come from elsewhere that we kind of gather in a bag of sorts on a piece of paper. And so but together they're these values that we hold close and dear. And to the question of sistering, I think that's really a really interesting question. We were drawn to it because it is a construction terminology that is widely used, and unlike a lot of other construction terms that has like a kind of a feminist maybe connotation perhaps. And I think maybe one of the ways that it could differ operationally from pairing, for example, is the interdependency that is required of sistering. Typically, it's like an old beam that is attached via nails or glue or some other form to a new beam, or a new beam attached to an old beam, that allows it to work together to support the loads that the old beam in and of itself couldn't have supported. So that kind of sharing of loads, I think, and the relational connection between elements seems to be an important aspect of sistering that we have been trying to draw out in multiple projects. And I think I missed part of the very last question, but hopefully Elif caught it.
Yeah, I'll try to address the last question, but please jump in if I've misunderstood any of it. But I think you're right in that, like, in like coming to the call to achieve broadest and fullest use, you can't check every box. And even with the shed, we wanted to blur the boundaries between or challenge rather the artificial boundaries between sort of interior and exterior, or like this is the human realm, this is everything else, and where all the animals and vapor and weather and everything is sequestered to, by making one of the 4 walls of the shed into an inhabitable poche space with the wood cribbing, like the Jenga style pieces of wood that were stacked. And in doing that, we also realized that there is really no boundary. Like everything is gonna be inhabited by critters eventually. And even if we call this one wall the critter wall, essentially every wall, every beam, every piece of the shed is already going to be inhabited by critters. I don't know if that answers the question though.
My question was more about like in preservation and bringing fullest and broadest use to some materials, it can consume more energies from others in the whole ecosystem, and that was kind of the major roadblock against this reparation in our current status quo. And so I'm wondering how are you thinking about it, or how you were practicing against it? If it clarifies it a little bit more.
I think like in terms of the labor and energy that goes into like properly deconstructing and like sorting and denailing and processing all the materials, yeah, absolutely. And it was also in that sense much harder maybe to source all the components we needed, and actually made the design, like forced the design into being very flexible and have a lot of tolerances. Because for example, we didn't know where we would get the siding materials up until the day we found it on Facebook Marketplace. So that is something to think about as we advocate for reuse, that it's in the infrastructures that are in place right now in terms of like work systems, labor systems. The market is much more aligned with a linear process of like getting all your materials off the shelf from Home Depot, everything standardized, and your design process is aligned to meet that predictability.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your answers. I'm just opening up to the other parts of the community. Are there other questions? Please raise your hand or feel free to ask something. In the meantime, I actually have a question to all presenters, because in connecting your practices a little bit together, I hear what I just already said: topics of care, ethics of care, requests for care, and also an architect that keeps on. How did you phrase it? The architect's involvement is never concluded, or will keep going on. So something like that. Yeah, you were phrasing. And I also see this a little bit back in Ishita's story about, broadening up the archival stories by including life in it. And I think this was also something mentioned in the manifesto. So I'm actually wondering, in a very practical way, how do you go about this? How because actually you're designing in such a way that suddenly the subjects that are involved in living in these places, you actually also request a different behavior from them. So how do you imagine this? Or how do you try to I don't know, get this community engagement going, both in exhibition making or in actually living in one of your buildings, like in your thesis projects for the bags? Do you have answers for this? Because it's, I mean, I completely relate to it. I would love people to behave like that, but it doesn't really work always immediately like this. And you don't need to have the answer. Yeah, try.
I can try
Yeah.
for that. I think, at least from the way we have been working, one of the things we have understood that it won't happen immediately. And I think I'm responding to your last point. We've constantly been working with the idea of slowness and immersion, which also allows community members to understand, sort of pushes us to explain if it needs to be explained 2 times or 4 times. There is time. There is time in the process, and the deliverance. The deliverance is not immediate, or it's not tomorrow, basically. Having said that, of course, everybody enjoys some sort of arriving at. So I think what we've understood in the process is the need for smaller goalposts, if I call them so. So even an experiment, an exercise, or a trial with the community or a workshop would be discussed and presented with that same rigor or with that same love or warmth as much as perhaps the final exhibit. And if there is this in between stage where we reach and we stop, or funds run out, or the exhibition timeline was only this much, so it's okay to only arrive at this much and keep the conversations running. And that's where we usually see all the stages or all the destinations as places for next conversation. So what's going to happen next in that exhibition or in that project? So we never really feel like we have completed, and there's less of a conversation around how complete it is or how accurate or perfect it is. And each project has become a reiteration of the previous one.
I really love that answer, because, you know, I'm asking a hard question about how can you make change possible? And then you address this with slowness and compassion. You know, every little soft shift makes a crucial change. And I really like this. And I can see how this can also work in, you know, constructing and building processes and living in a building there. That's, yeah. I am, do you still want to react, Cynthia?
Well, yeah, I mean, I had like 2 short kind of responses, perhaps. I mean, I think we explored multiple ways of, I guess, you know, making these kinds of shifts happen. And in the thesis, for example, there were those kind of legal interventions that kind of more top-down imposed, like these are like policy suggestions, I guess, or, you know, easements, different ways to think about private property that might be more redistributory. I think that's one way to think about it. And then maybe on the other side of, on the flip side, there's like a more kind of bottom-up approach, in that there are already things here that we're actively like recognizing and trying to build on. There's like experiments, there's possibilities, there's fragments, there's signals of the kind of future that we might want to move towards, that are already here, that sometimes are overlooked or invisibilized on purpose. And so how can we like lift those up and center those from like the existing networks of repair and reuse that we were identifying, and trying to kind of expand upon that constitution, the Mexico City Constitution, that explicitly did say that there was a right to care and there was a right to reparations. I mean, how could that play out in a future? A lot of organizations whose work we built on, like the domestic workers, the National Domestic Workers Union, which started around the time that we started collaborating, and we were able to, you know, have a small collaboration with them, like kind of building upon the work that's already being done, I think.
Yeah, I think that's also a really nice answer, and also feeds into, I think, what the Feminist Spatial Practice platform is aiming for in general, to make these things that are already happening and are already visible, are already happening but not visible yet, make them visible and connect through them. Thank you very much for your answers. The time is up for today, so we have to wrap up. And I will thank everybody for joining in, especially the presenters to share their story. I would definitely hope and invite you to continue this conversation through the social media. If you have questions, don't hesitate to contact us, email us. We will collect them, wrap them up. You can use our Instagram to ask questions to the presenters. And we also open up this kind of practice share for everybody who's interested. So don't hesitate to contact me or Abri if you want to share your practice. This can be in a presentation. You can also walk through your atelier, focus on one project, or just centralize around one question you want to share with us. It doesn't need to be finished. It doesn't need to be perfect. We're just inviting you to join the conversation. And we hope to keep on going in conversation in the future with you.
Absolutely. And maybe just to add to that point and do a little plug, in order to support all of this amazing work, we're going to be launching a crowdfunding campaign next week. So keep, take a look at our Instagram page for updates about that. And it's going to help us do not only virtual events, but also in-person exhibitions, conferences, books, all kinds of things. So please take a look at that. Thank you.
Enjoy your day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yay! We did it. Y'all, that was awesome.